Good afternoon. Yes, good afternoon. So, I'm Jeff Goldberg. I'm the publisher of the Sundance Times and for a little bit longer, president of the Wyoming Press Association board. So, just to reiterate what Darcy said, thank you all for attending. We appreciate it very much. It's one of the high points of our year, and we're grateful to be able to celebrate it with all of you. Understandably, you had to take a little risk with the weather. But again, thank you. We have our students, our associate members, those of you that are here to present and speak, thank you. I'd also like to take a second and specifically thank Rocky Mountain Power. They've been a long-time sponsor of this Meet the Press luncheon. And we truly appreciate all that they give us and help us make this happen, along with our other great sponsors, but specifically thank you. Good. And without prolonging any further, I'd like to introduce Nick Carlish, President of Rocky Mountain Power, to move on with the introduction of our governor. Good afternoon. I'm really happy to be here, excited to be hosting this lunch again. As over this past year in Wyoming, we had a really concentrated effort to get out across the state in several areas and meet with our customers, our constituents, and our stakeholders. And the media and the press was a part of that. It was a big part of it. And I personally appreciated the level of engagement and the good questions that were asked about energy, because there's a lot going on in space and a lot that we need to talk about in the public domain and with each other. And so I really appreciate that time and attention that people made to be a part of those processes, and just how we engage with our company in general, whether it's our things about our energy future, those conversations, or even about the great things like our community foundation and what they do to support our communities through donations and community support throughout the year. So happy to sponsor the launch and really appreciate the work that you all do. And I'm very pleased this afternoon to introduce Governor Mark Gordon. His leadership on energy and is some of the best that we have in the nation, and definitely the best in the Rocky Mountain Power States, to focus on balanced outcomes and trying to get to an all-of-the-above energy strategy that makes sense for us today, tomorrow, and in the future. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce Wyoming's 33rd Governor, Mark Gordon.
And I hope disappointed Darcy didn't keep going. So thank you for the introduction. Thanks, Rocky Mountain Power. This is going to be a bad joke, but for keeping us all current with all of you here. Truly, it was an honor every time I had a chance to address the Press Association. You are more valuable than you could even imagine. It is phenomenal at this time. There's so much that's happening that it is really great to be here. I see my friend Kurt Meyer, the treasurer, is here. Kurt's been doing a really phenomenal job leading on the investments and making things happen there. A great asset. I did see former Secretary Max Maxfield, Secretary of State here. And my eyes aren't as good as they used to be, but I think there are a number of wonderful people here today, and so if I miss anybody, my apologies. So, but I'll talk a little bit about kind of where Wyoming is, and a little bit about where we're going, and then answer most of your questions, because I think that's really what you came to be enlightened about. I don't know what government could be. But in any event, what I did want to say before I got started, it was interesting to me on the 15th, which was my State of the State. It happened to be the anniversary of the very last State of the State that was ever given to the territorial government. Same anniversary, 15th. And it gave me an opportunity to think about how far our state has come in that time. I'm also very proud to be the first governor elected from Johnson County, and there's a lot of history there, as many of you know. But I was not aware of the fact that Frank Lucas, who replaced Governor Ross when he passed away in office, and then ran against Governor Ross when she was in office, was the initiator of the Buffalo Bulletin, which is, of course, Rob, it's my local paper. So, Rob and Jim, thank you, and it's wonderful to be able to represent Johnson County in this capacity. Let me start a little bit about where I think we find ourselves in the state now with regard to our position nationally. And then I'll come back and kind of walk a little bit through where I think the state is itself. Nationally, it is so exciting to have not one, not two, not three, but a president and several of his secretarial folks talk about and all of the above energy scenarios. You've all heard it. Yesterday, Lee was talking about that, and the potential secretary for our administrator for EPA. Doug Burgum, obviously, many of you know, Doug and I are very close. We've done a lot of work together on energy, on carbon capture, et cetera. All of the idea of how do we develop all of the above? How do we make sure that our country can power itself with domestic energy and really do a great job. I can tell you that in talking with Chris Wright, the nominee for Secretary of Energy, so refreshing to have somebody who actually knows about Wyoming, has an industry that is Liberty Oil, which is very present in the state.
The new store. This is the one-stop shop. We have a pharmacy. We have a bootlegger's liquor. The deli, the food that you can get at a lunchtime is so amazing. The coffee shop. Certain Friday mornings, there's 30 people sitting here in all these chairs. This is the hub for people to come and visit, have their coffee, have their donut. It's amazing what this area has done. Totally amazing.
So refreshing to have somebody who actually knows about Wyoming, has an industry that is Liberty Oil, which is very present in the state. Very excited about all of the energy initiatives that Wyoming has brought, and recognizes the leadership that we have. It's been a kind of a competition between us and North Dakota. I think we're winning. I tell that on a regular basis. But if you look across the whole landscape, we really do have so many things here that we can talk about that are coming to fruition, which are making a difference. You know, we're the first nuclear plant, thanks to Rocky Mountain and others. That's coming along. It takes a lot longer than it should, but it is coming along. So thrilled to be able to talk about building our domestic capacity for uranium production. Obviously, uranium's a very important part of our economy, was and has been in the past. Building that nuclear fuel source here in the country is going to be incredibly valuable. Of course, we also need to think about what waste is concerned, and the fact that these newer modular efforts can be much less, produce a lot less waste. This is all very exciting for Wyoming being the center of that. You look at what and Vic and I were talking over lunch a little bit about IRPs, the integrated resource plans that guide utility development, and it's been really interesting to watch as we were talking, how these really essential documents that sort of guide how we're going to develop a particular resource over time, 20 years, have originally started out as really solid business documents, then became political documents, then became something else, and now they're kind of drifting back into what is it we need to do to power this nation. We have a tremendous demand coming online. You've all heard about AI, you've all heard about data centers. There's just consumers that are much more interested too. A lot of the efficiency that was a big way that we could develop more energy by being more efficient. That's harder to get to now. So there is a huge demand, and that means that we've got infrastructure needs that we're going to have to build. That's going to be exciting for Wyoming. But then the challenge is, how do we really site these? And then how does that whole grid network work? Is it going to be the same as what we thought about 20 years ago? Is it going to be the same as what we thought about even 5 years ago? Or what are the changes going to be? And then you look at what our country has done over the last few years, like decade. It has slowed the pace of development so dramatically with permitting requirements that actually 3 administrations now have been saying we can't develop. We can't develop as a nation if it takes us 12, 15, 14, 20 years to be able to get just to a point of getting our permits. And if you think about how important it is to find that equilibrium that's going to be so critical to allowing projects to develop over a horizon that's going to take at least 5 years to maybe 10 years. You can't do that with wild swings from one side to the other every 4 years. So finding that all of the above energy approach is exactly where Wyoming has been and why we are in such a great position. I do want to thank the Press Association for holding this gathering, because you obviously brought the snow to the state. And if you had a chance to look at the drought monitoring maps and think about what last year's summer's experience was, you know how important it is that we have moisture, that we do, and we're not out of the woods. So when we think about water, we're the headwaters for so many different drainages. From the Colorado, which is really going to be critical as we look to the future, and making sure that Wyoming's water is protected. So one of the things I've really asked for in this legislative session is the ability to be able to not only have the talent to understand exactly what the water resources are, the detailed analysis, but also the ability to protect them, because we know that other states in the drainage are arming up. Utah has an office of several attorneys, and several $1 million that's really planning to protect their water rights. Our friends to the south in Colorado are also very engaged on water and starting to be a little bellicose about how they see their role. Obviously we have Arizona, California, all the states on the drainage. So it really is important that Wyoming be there in force. Brandon Gephardt has been a great leader, and Wyoming has done a phenomenal job over the years to really establish our primacy in terms of information, in terms of management. But that is going to become even more important as we go forward, and we look at the potential development that we have down in the Southwest, trona from uranium, from just the recreation and other uses. It's really an exciting time for southwestern Wyoming. But that doesn't actually change that much if you walk up the state and look at the Snake River. That's been a big issue, trying to understand how you manage all of that irrigation structure. And you realize that Wyoming doesn't have a lot of water in the Snake. It flows through the state, but Idaho is where most of that water is used, and the way that manages it affects our tourism, but it also affects our farms. So trying to have the kind of access that's going to be important to understand better management of that is going to be critical. Same is true for the Missouri, where large traffic is.
We actually have hundreds of thousands of acres.
So I think there's a lot of things that
that
Wyoming
incorporate
will be front and center
could
in
use
natural
some
resources.
transportation diversion.
And I'm very proud of the fact that we have an incredibly well represented and well-staffed state, and we continue to do that. So sort of backing up a little bit, that's kind of a long view about Wyoming's central role. And I think you can look regionally in the West, where we have a tremendous contingent of great administrations from Idaho and Montana, North and South Dakota, Nebraska. I'll even put in Colorado a little bit. Polis and I have worked together on a couple of issues with Lynn Grisham, and I have with Cox, and I think you're going to find really common sense, good policies coming out of the West. And it is my hope, and I believe this administration, this incoming Trump administration, really is looking to the West to solve problems. So common sense, good policies coming out of the West. And it is my hope, and I believe this administration, this incoming Trump administration, really is looking to the West to solve problems. So that's nice. That's nice for us here, because it means we're going to be paid attention to. And to have the kind of access that, that this state now has, and my colleagues have, to the White House, to policy directors, instead of having, I don't want to beat up on I'm not trying to be political about this, but just the simple fact that, if I call, I can get a return call from the secretary. And I can have an engaged conversation about why we can't delist the grizzly bear, which has been a really big frustration, as you all know. First we had distinct populations. Yellowstone had its distinct population. Montana had theirs, and that population recovered. Everybody agreed with it, so we just made it bigger. And now we're talking about delisting an entire population. I think we'll have more common sense approaches to this instead of, as I heard the last time, when I brought this up, and I said, that just makes no sense. You're basically saying the population has recovered to the point where they no longer have to have a distinct population. So we've got bears that are, not only recovered, but we've also demonstrated last year that we can move genetics from one population to the other, so problem solved. Why are you saying it's now going to be the whole region, perhaps the whole country? And the response was, well, the bears moved the goalposts. Interesting response. So I'm hopeful that they're able to bring a little bit more to that. Here at home, thinking about our future, of course, this is and I mentioned what I did about the territorial legislature, because the new state had a whole new lease on life. A lot of legislators that were kind of coming from the territorial to the state, but a whole new lease on life and a whole bunch of ideas about where they're going to go. Obviously, our state has grown over the time, and we have a tremendous history. This year, I think there is an attitude among some of the legislators that we also have another opportunity for a new lease on life. And I think that conversation will begin to mature as we go through the session. I don't know if the treasurer and I haven't really had the chance to really compare notes yet, but there's some very big ideas that are in this legislature. Some that don't necessarily track. And I think there's going to be a coming to grips with what we can accomplish and what we can't accomplish. And I'll give you one example. Early in the fall, meeting with a number of new legislators, there was a question about what are we going to do about the new shooting complex. Well, the state, actually the Board of Land Commissioners, approved a lease that said, we've got the 30-year lease as long as the legislature funds it. And so I reported that when the question came up. And one of the other new legislators, both Freedom Caucus legislators, folded their arms and said, well, my constituents don't want a dime of taxpayer money going to that project. So for us in the executive branch, it was a wonderful opportunity to say, well, that's a legislative problem. I guess welcome to the legislature. You can have a good conversation. And I think we're going to start to see that. And so I have really good expectations and a great deal. Of course, Kurt has been through the legislature before. I think everybody comes with a big fire built under them. They've got things they want to do. And then in time, they begin to understand what the challenges are and how important it is. That's the reason why in my State of the State, I really focused on things that are essential. Recovery from fire, ability to fight fire, making sure that we can extend OB, make ourselves more competitive so we can keep OB services in the state. Make sure that our education system proceeds. We've done some phenomenal things with education. We're getting national recognition for that. We shouldn't slow down on that at all. And these are just essential things. The budget that was passed last year was solid and it anticipated the winding down of federal funding. So we're in a good position, and Wyoming is in a terrific place to go forward. The decisions that are made may have consequences, will have consequences, and that was my parting shot to the legislature was, please think about those consequences. There's a lot of let's get money back to the people. Everyone here appreciates that. We all want to have efficient, lean government, but we do depend on services. And if we turn the Legislative Stabilization Reserve account, the so-called LSRA, into the let's spend it right away account, LSRA 2, that's going to be problematic for the state. So I think we need to be wise, we need to be thoughtful. You all are the people that make people understand what the issues are and report on the news. Can't thank you enough for that service, and I hope you keep it up and keep coming strong. So thank you very much. I would be happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Member Gordon. Bryce Jacobson from the Sheridan Press. You talked a lot about natural resources today. What does the rare minerals that were found in northern Sheridan County look like? How can the state assist in that exploration and extraction? What role might those play in the future of natural resources?
Well, thank you, Bryce, for that. Critical minerals and rare earths are going to be essential to any economy going forward. Right now, as I think everybody knows, China has done an amazing job of locking up around the world some of these really critical mineral resources. It's a delight that Wyoming has that. It's going to take a little bit of time before we can get that developed, but I do believe the national will is there to make that happen, and I think
doesn't play any of those sports, but I know that if she wanted to wrestle or play lacrosse or rugby or something, I would be very glad that she has it to where she could do it with women and not with the men.
Did you see it, Sonia? Blowing up
What's
this
that?
fast and this big? Did you? I mean, you're.
I'm not surprised. I know that girls have wanted to have that opportunity to do that. And so, it's daunting to think about wrestling boys, and it's tough when you go into a sport pretty much knowing that there's no way I'm going to win, and to keep at it and keep passionate about it. And so to have your own division where you're wrestling against, women, because like Alexis said, it's biology. The boys are going to be stronger in high school than you are, no matter how good you are.
But I do believe the national will is there to make that happen, and I think it's going to be a very right part of our future. It is going to mean some changes in how our economy is geared, but I think that's going to be good for us because we'll bring some more technical skills in as well. So thanks.
Good, oh goodness. All right, well, good afternoon, Governor. I'm Jasmine from the Jacksonville News and Guide, and I cover state politics there. I'm here right now for a couple of weeks covering the session, like I have for the past few years, and I think we've seen such a shift. I was in a committee meeting this morning, Judiciary, and they were discussing the gun-free zones repealer bill. And someone came up and he asked, what are we doing? We have long been a state that has revered local control on so many different issues. And I think we're seeing so many bills right now that are taking away local control, whether that be for law enforcement or education. We're seeing counties that were targeted. Teton County continuously comes up. I would love to hear, because I know you don't comment on bills specifically, how did we get here?
Oh, my
Well, Jasmine, you know, for me, as a traditional Republican, local control is essential. And I feel it is absolutely critical that we respect people that are elected locally for the job that they do. They're closest to the ground. It's the same complaint we have with Washington, D.C. running our efforts. That particular effort, obviously last year I said, it's too sweeping. I've heard from school board members, I've heard from others. I grew up here. I've hunted all my life. I've never felt that my Second Amendment rights were ever in jeopardy. And I do think that my hope was, as you heard, that every institution would have the chance to start to review what the policies were. I was just in Evanston not long ago. That school district, a couple of years ago, put in place a carry provision in their school. They had training required, they had some other things they did, and to have that all swept away, all that effort, I think was disrespectful potentially to that district. So it's my hope that we find a measured approach. That's what my colleagues on the State Building Commission have really looked at, to be able to make sure that people can carry into the Capitol, but do it under an organized kind of way. So how did we get here? I think we got here because there was kind of a national groundswell of a lot of these issues. I have, and we've heard me say this over and over again, I believe Wyoming is a leader. Growing up here, and Bob, you and I grew up sort of in the same community, I was always proud of the fact that we were kind of slow to adopt things. You know, bell bottoms were really cool in the 90s. And for me, our approach was always fairly independent. We really thought about where we were going, and I worry just with the scope of the way information is dispersed now, that, a lot of us, and I don't know if you've heard this too, but there's, well, Florida's doing this, or Texas is doing that, or, Louisiana's got something else, and I keep getting these messages, why aren't we doing that? Well, we aren't doing it because we're Wyoming. We're not the rest of the nation. That's why we're so good in energy. That's why we're so good in education. That's why we're so strong on the values that are culturally important to Wyoming.
I'm Ann Jansen. I'm the managing editor of the Rocket Liner in Rock Springs.
Yes.
And in Sweetwater County right now, our big focus is on the record of decision with the resource management plan that the BLM just recently put out, and how it's going to affect our economy. So my question to you is, what's the next steps in this process? Because it's damaging.
Right. Well, thank you. And we have the same issue with sagebrush, which should be out almost any day now. We have the same issue with the Buffalo RMP. These were sort of parting gifts from the outgoing administration, which were really frustrating. I worked incredibly hard to try to bring more reason to that. When you were being there, the task force ran out of time. We tried to extend it because they were really getting to some of the more sticky parts of that. And so when it became clear that this administration had, put its foot down and wasn't going to negotiate it anymore, our emphasis switched a little bit. So we've looked at Congressional Review Act, which is something that was contemplated in Alaska some time ago. Never was used, as probably precedential if it does happen. We looked at that as a potential remedy. We've looked at amending it as a potential remedy. We're also litigating it. And so there's a lot more to play out on this. I don't believe, and I've made this point over and over again, that I will admit that I believe that there was some public input, particularly on the greater Little Mountain area and others, where this administration listened to local concerns, but others where it didn't. And we are very much engaged to bring some more balance to that document. And I can tell you that I have a good working relationship potentially with the incoming Secretary of Interior, and I look for some opportunities there to be able to redress what I think was an incredible overreach on the part of this outgoing administration. We'll be in touch as, I was just over talking to your county commissioners and representatives, and so we'll be talking about what are the opportunities there. So we'll be very engaged with the local community. Thank you.
Hi, Governor. Thanks for being here. 91 File. I also wanted to ask about the legislature. More specifically, I wanted to ask about the actions of the Joint Appropriations Committee took this morning to essentially amend the supplemental budget to include some of your line item vetoes from the budget last session. I understand it was kind of an unusual move for appropriators to do, so I'm wondering what you make of it and what do you think it might tell us about how the executive and the legislative branches might work together this session? Thanks.
Manny, thank you. I'm going to be meeting with the Joint Appropriations just after this, so we'll have more of a good conversation. It's a long ways till the end of the session. It sometimes, I found now being in this a few years that, you have to let things kind of simmer for a while before you really get too terribly worked up about it. My biggest concerns are you have a Joint Appropriations Committee with a lot of new members, and I'm not clear that they all have a full understanding of exactly what happens when you get rid of this or add that, and what the implications are down the line. And so I think, in fullness of time, I'm hopeful that we'll have a little bit more of a good conversation. There is, you've heard it in legislators, there's a real desire to, we're the people that run government, everybody works for us, etc. There's some of that attitude, which is something that, both Madison and Hamilton said was one of the reasons they built the Constitution the way they did. Because it is the temptation of the legislature to take over everything. And my hope is that, a bit more reasonableness will prevail. And we'll have a better balance in that conversation. So, thanks.
In addition to the weekly printed version of the newsletter journal, we also promote our community and share important information on our award-winning website, newslj.com, and in our weekly email newsletter, Nuke Now. We also connect with readers through various social media platforms and invite you to check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can even take a look at a recent meeting of the City Council, School Board, or County Commission on our YouTube channel. We do hope that you will go to newslj.com and subscribe today, and we look forward to making all of our great content available to you. But regardless of your level of support, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for doing your part to preserve a free and independent local press.
A bit more reasonableness will prevail, and we'll have a better balance in that conversation. So, thanks. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Hi. Thank you so much for your time here today. I saw in the news release regarding your State of the State speech that you mentioned obstetrics care is one of your concerns. I think that's a a very popular concern these days in the state. I think it might even be a bit of a confusing landscape for doctors, for both pro-choice and pro-life doctors, considering the court cases have been as long as they have been. I'm kind of wondering what our state is going to be doing about what other actions our state is going to be doing about it. I'm also kind of curious about what your view is about the kind of state versus local mentality, because I mean there are a whole bunch of pockets here that are very, very pro-life, and then at the same time there's other parts of the state that are less so. So kind of just curious for your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think the question was, what's the direction the state's going to take on
Obstetrics care.
Obstetrics care, okay. Yeah, and to your point, I think there are places that are pro-life and places that are pro-choice. I believe Wyoming is a pro-life state by and large. And I also believe that one thing we can all agree on is that having good care for mothers is something that we need to have. We also know that in places like Evanston, Rollins, and others, they've had to close their obstetrics. Riverton is trying to recruit an OB, and all of these things kind of come into play. So Wyoming, I believe, is going to focus, at least this is my intent, we're going to focus on making sure that we can provide good OB care, and it may require some sort of fairly creative ways to look at it. We're looking at things that Alaska has done, for example, to provide housing close to facilities that can provide good OB care, so that somebody in a high-risk pregnancy can come there and stay, and family can stay with them. There are a lot of these types of things that I think we can look at as we go forward. But we don't compensate OB in Wyoming as we should. We're not competitive with some of our neighboring states, and that, in fact, is the issue for Evanston, where they had to close a clinic, both for volume and for the fact that just didn't have people that could provide those services. So you close the clinic there for OB care, and you have to travel all the way to Utah. It costs a lot of money. Luckily, the clinic in Utah also has a way to sort of help compensate that, but at what point do you find a way to say, Wyoming can take care of their own, thank you, and that's where my effort is going to be. So, thanks. I think Jen had a question.
We have time for one more question, real quick. And then we have a special presentation, so stick around.
Jen Hicks with the Buffalo Bulletin. Governor, I'm kind of a Wyoming maximalist despite being a transplant. But I'm wondering, what do you hope for the final 2 years of your term? What is your vision for Wyoming for the next 2 years?
I'm happy to answer the second part of that question. In the next 2 years, I want to see Wyoming continue to push the educational reforms that we've done. RIDE is just astounding. If you have a chance to visit a RIDE school, go and visit one of their celebrations of learning, and the real conversation that goes on, it's really novel and interesting. I was just in Cameron, and that's a 100% RIDE school. The coach of the high school team said, I didn't know how you did this. I mean, You know, he said you got to be involved with schools and everything else. And that was really interesting because he said, you know, I'm supposed to make kids run faster, jump higher, et cetera, et cetera. But then I started thinking, well, what if I made every one of these kids be a coach and then work with them? And then they rotate around and to hear the kids talking with the coach about how do I motivate somebody? Or what's the drill that I need to come up with to make that thing happen? It was a really engaged conversation. You've heard about science, you've heard about English history, and all of that. The RIDE initiative is not exclusive to our traditional schools. It's also the Prairie View School in Chudwater is looking at that. So that, to me, from the point of view of having parents engaged, because now you have parents that say, what did you do at school? And they have a conversation. I can tell you about that. But also the fact that it's much more relevant to the workplace and the workforce. Getting all internships and other things that we built on that. That's exciting, and I think it makes us much more attractive. I think we need to double down on what we've done in the and the natural resources. And then finally, I just want to see the Wyoming that I grew up in and that I expected, not some other place, but the Wyoming that I love and live. That's what I want to see emerge once again.